So, what if I told you that most of your relationship conflicts are actually preventable? Not through endless compromise and not through years of therapy, but through a very specific, strategic framework. That's the explosive idea we're looking at today, from a source that promises a relationship with zero fighting. But is that even a healthy goal? Okay, let's dive into this.
Right out of the gate, the source makes this provocative claim that a whopping 70% of relationship conflicts can be just prevented, wiped off the map, all with a specific kind of strategic emotional intelligence. It's a bold promise, right? The idea that harmony isn't luck, but a skill you can actually learn.
But here's the thing. While the original source has some really interesting ideas, it leaves out some massive, absolutely critical pieces of the scientific puzzle. So in this explainer, we're not just going to summarize its advice. Oh no, we are going to deconstruct it, test it against hard science, and then rebuild it into something way more powerful and a lot more reliable.
So here's the game plan. We'll start with the source's core idea, what I'm calling the no-fight fallacy. Then we'll build our scientific foundation, looking at emotional connection and how to pick a partner a little more wisely. We'll get into the huge difference between regulating and suppressing your emotions. Then we'll hit the big critique, what the source gets dangerously wrong, before we wrap it all up with a practical 30-day protocol you can actually use.
All right, first up, the central philosophy. The source material basically argues that fighting in a relationship is not only pointless, but it's a game you are absolutely guaranteed to lose. The ultimate victory, in its view, is total conflict avoidance.
And this quote is really at the heart of the whole thing. The only winning move is not to play. The argument goes that because of supposed differences in how we process emotions, direct confrontation just doesn't work. So the greatest victory is the one that requires no battle at all.
You know, this immediately brings up a huge question. Is a relationship with zero conflict actually healthy? Or is it just a relationship where really important stuff is getting swept under the rug? This is the critical question the source just doesn't answer very well, and that's exactly where we need to bring in the science.
So let's build that scientific foundation. To really get why the no-fight strategy is so flawed, we first have to understand the powerful and often invisible ways we are literally wired to connect with and influence each other's emotional states. It all starts with something called attachment theory. Think of this as the bedrock of relationship science. We are all hardwired from birth with a need to form deep emotional bonds. And our attachment style, whether we lean secure, anxious, or avoidant, is like our internal blueprint for how we handle intimacy and how we react when we feel threatened, especially during a disagreement.
And then there's the flat-out neuroscience. Have you ever walked into a room and you could just feel the tension? Yeah, that's your mirror neurons at work. These are incredible brain cells that fire not just when we do something, but when we see someone else do it. It's the biological reason for empathy. And it's why your partner's stress, or their joy, or their anger can literally become your own. This isn't a personality flaw. It's just our wiring.
And this really highlights a key difference. The source uses this metaphor of an incubator, like a one-way street where one person's emotions just get magnified and reflected back. But scientific reality shows us it's actually co-regulation. This is a two-way, mutual process where partners are constantly, and in both directions, influencing each other's nervous systems, their heart rates, even their stress hormone levels. It's a dance, not a monologue. Okay, so let's move on to the source's first big strategy, partner selection. The advice is basically to screen out partners who are prone to drama. And look, it's not entirely wrong, but it is a very, very simplistic way of looking at a really complex issue.
The source claims that 90% of a successful relationship comes down to just choosing the right person. And honestly, there's a lot of research that backs up just how important selection is. But the real key isn't just about avoiding people you think are difficult. It's about understanding compatibility on a much deeper, more scientific level. The real shift in mindset here is moving from just looking for red flags to actively searching for green flags. So instead of just dodging drama, you should be looking for evidence-based traits. Like, can this person regulate their own emotions? Do they know how to repair things after an argument? How do your attachment styles actually line up? And maybe most importantly, do you have these qualities yourself? It's got to be a mutual evaluation, not a one-sided screening process.
This brings us to the source's most actionable and maybe its most dangerous piece of advice: how to manage your emotional tone. And here, we have to make a vital distinction between healthy emotional regulation and really harmful emotional suppression. Just look at this comparison. The source explicitly says to remove every hint of negative emotion.
That's suppression. That's pretending an emotion doesn't exist. Science tells us that's a recipe for resentment and disconnection. The healthy goal is regulation. You acknowledge what you're feeling, and then you manage how you express it so you can communicate constructively. See the difference? One builds walls, the other builds bridges.
And this perfectly illustrates the balance that we're really aiming for. Dr. John Gottman's amazing research found that the true predictor of relationship stability isn't the absence of negativity, but its ratio to positivity. Stable, happy couples have at least 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. Conflict is going to happen, but it has to be massively outweighed by connection, affection, and repair.
So how do you actually do this in the heat of the moment? Well, you can use a practical tool like the pause technique. Before you react, just pause. Acknowledge what you're feeling, give it a name. Try to understand what triggered it. Then, and this is key, soften your startup. Begin the conversation gently instead of with an attack. And finally, engage constructively. That right there is emotional regulation in action.
Okay, now we need to talk about the most critical flaws in the source material. By ignoring the science of mutuality and connection, this framework isn't just incomplete, it can be genuinely harmful.
So here are the core problems. First, its advice is soaked in gender essentialism, framing these dynamics as if they only apply to men dealing with women, when in reality, these principles apply to everyone. It also promotes this idea of one-sided emotional labor, putting the entire burden of managing the relationship's climate on one person. And crucially, this advice is downright dangerous and completely useless in abusive dynamics. And finally, it misses the whole point. Healthy conflict actually leads to growth. The goal isn't avoiding fights, it's building a secure attachment where disagreements can be handled safely.
All right, so we've deconstructed the bad advice and we've laid out the science. Now, let's turn these ideas into an actual, actionable plan. Here's a 30-day protocol you can use to put this science to work in your own relationship.
For the first couple of weeks, just focus on self-awareness. Keep an emotion journal. Figure out what specifically triggers a negative response in you. Then in weeks 3 and 4, you start to actively practice. Use that PAUSE technique in small disagreements and consciously work on increasing your 5-to-1 ratio. Then in the following weeks, you make it a team effort. Set up a weekly low-stakes check-in with your partner to talk about what's working and what isn't.
And this right here is the ultimate takeaway. The secret to a lasting, happy relationship isn't a scorecard with 0 fights. The strongest, most resilient couples are masters of repair. They know how to navigate disagreement, they know how to fix the rupture quickly, and most importantly, they know how to maintain a current of warmth and affection even when they don't see eye to eye.
And that's our analysis. We've gone from a flawed, no-fight model to a science-backed framework for building resilience and a much deeper connection. So I'll just leave you with this question to think about. Based on everything we've covered, what is the one communication pattern, big or small, that you will commit to changing this week? The journey to a better relationship really does start there.